I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. Given the state of this weekend, for Los Angeles, it's been a very politically active weekend, and then today being Father's Day, I'm pleasantly surprised anyone's even here today. So first of all, I just want to thank you and applaud you for choosing to be at a Buddhist temple this Sunday and spending your time this way. But I have to say, the weird juxtaposition of yesterday and then today gives like a strange quality to Father's Day in my mind. And, I think that's partially because, I think about what a father is meant to do. If you remember last month, I also gave the Mother's Day talk. And I chose a couple of passages in the Pali Canon where the Buddha talks about what parents do and how important parents are and the debt that we have to parents and so on. And you might remember that I talked about how parents introduce us to the world, they bring us into the world. But one of the other things that they do is that they educate us. And we live in a time where, perhaps this has always been the case, but it seems like even more so now that, it's not just parents doing the educating anymore. Society at large is doing the educating. The internet is doing a lot of educating. And given what I see when I look out, not just at Los Angeles, but at the world at large, I become a little saddened when I see what a lot of young men in particular are learning these days. The way that their minds are being shaped, not only by their own fathers, but their parents and mothers and just the internet as well. So I thought that on this Father's Day, given what I see in some young men, that giving rise to thoughts of anger and thoughts of hatred towards others, that today on Father's Day it would be really important to talk about qualities like the Brahmaviharas. If you don't know what the Brahmaviharas are, they're 4 mental qualities that we develop as Buddhists that the Buddha really spoke highly of as qualities that create, for lack of a better term, a good person. Someone who works on loving kindness or goodwill, like we did at the beginning of this Sunday service, working on qualities like compassion and empathetic joy and equanimity. And so I'll touch on all of those, but I really do think that developing these qualities does a lot to help us be a good person in the world, because once we start developing these qualities, we really start thinking about what we think, what we say, and what we do. And we do them from places like goodwill and compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And, the thing is that there are people who have developed these qualities who are not even Buddhist. I don't want it to come across like Buddhism has a monopoly on these qualities. Anyone can develop these qualities and develop them to the point of being a truly good and admirable person. But we tend to live in a society that thinks that really isn't possible anymore. I'll give you an example from my own childhood growing up, and you might have heard me talk about this man before, but I've always been a huge fan of Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers. I loved watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I loved watching that show as a kid. And it was so different from all the other shows I saw on TV at the time. Everything was dramatic, colorful, loud, and blasting at you. And then here was this guy just sort of meditatively, quietly, just feeding his fish, looking at the trolley going on, telling all these nice little stories, and just spending really good quality time with the children who were watching him through the TV. And he was someone who was just really good. You know, you read his biographies, you hear interviews with people, and they all have just the same story. Just such a kind guy. He really was how he presented himself. He was like that all the time. And even then, while he was still alive, people just couldn't stand it. They had to come up with some kind of story, some kind of thing to say about him that could be bad, and sometimes it was whole cloth made up. Around the same time, there was also figures like Bob Ross, right? And Bob Ross had been, I think, at some point in the military or something along those lines. And so they tried to say the same thing about Fred Rogers. I remember being a kid in school, and people would try to say that Fred Rogers, before he started Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, had been in the military and was some kind of military assassin, some kind of sniper or something. I remember kids telling these kind of stories. I don't know if any of you ever heard those growing up as a kid, but they wanted to give Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers of all people, some kind of dark, mysterious path soaked in blood. Why? Him, really? The same man who said he couldn't eat animal flesh because he could never eat anything that had a mother? That guy? I don't really think so, And the thing is that there are plenty of people who are relieved that they have all these heroes in the past. They end up finding out did all these terrible things, but Mr. Rogers, he's a hero through and through. But some of those people, if something came to light tomorrow, would be like, I knew it. Like they don't really believe it. Case in point, I'm going to sound really geeky for a moment, but I'm also a really big fan of Superman, what some people think is the lamest, most boring superhero that's ever existed. He's got all the powers, he's good all the time, he's a big giant Boy Scout. How lame. What does everyone like? Batman. The troubled billionaire who spends his night dressed up as a bat beating people up in alleyways. That's their favorite, right? And fine, that's neither here nor there. But, we live in a time where people had a really difficult time believing someone like Superman could exist in the world. So rewind back to, I don't know, what was it, 2012 or 13, whenever it is they decided to make Man of Steel and all the other movies like Batman v Superman. And what do we have? A dark, gritty Superman. Because that's what the world needs. A complicated alien just kind of beating people up. Well, now he's just Batman with powers. But you have this guy who's just dark and brooding and kind of petty. Some guy throws a mug of beer in his face, so he takes the guy's truck and throws it and drops it on a big giant power pole or something like that. And it's just like not very Supermanly, And then in the next movie, Batman v Superman, what comes out of Superman's mouth? He's talking to Lois and he goes, I don't think anyone in this world gets to stay good. Or something along those lines. No one gets to be good. And so that's what, the director and the writer thought Superman needed to say at the time. Now, bring us back to now and what's coming out next month? Another Superman movie. We're starting all over. It's not Man of Steel, it's not Batman v Superman, it's not some other, Superman Reborn or whatever. It's just Superman. And it's a golly gee shucks looking guy dressed in all blue. He's got the red underwear back on and he seems to be hopeful. And so that will hopefully be the message we see going forward with Superman, the big blue Boy Scout, who's trying to be good in a world that doesn't believe in actual true goodness. So I hope it does well. We'll see next month if there are more fans of Superman, and it's not just me and a lot of other guys that are really fretting over his depiction in media. But in a world that doesn't really believe in goodness, all the more important that we, those practicing this Buddhist path, believe in goodness and really believe in what these qualities of mind can do out in the world when we really, truly cultivate them. To be maybe not like Superman, because, there's a lot of fantastical things he can do. I mean, if you ever watched Superman, was it 4, The Quest for Peace? Because of budgetary reasons, they gave him basically a bricklaying supervision, where there was damage to the Great Wall of China, and he just stares at it, and all the bricks start building back up again. So we probably can't aspire to Superman, but I think we can aspire to someone like Fred Rogers, who by no means was a Buddhist. He was a Presbyterian minister, but someone who I believe really had these qualities in his every action, in his thoughts, his words, and his deeds. He was someone of goodwill. He was someone of compassion. He was someone of empathetic joy. and someone of equanimity. So it's worth developing those qualities. You'll notice that at the beginning of this meditation, I defined what goodwill is. It is a sincere wish. It is a wholesome desire for not just your happiness, but the happiness of others. But it's important to start with ourselves, to really, really want your true and lasting happiness. Not the kind of frittering happiness that many people go after. They go after sensuality, they go after power, they go after, other ways that they think might make them happy, and they don't really try to find a peaceful mind, a peaceful heart, true happiness. But we can aspire to that. We can see the good in that and truly want that for ourselves. That's good motivation that helps us develop the path in the first place. I've been practicing Buddhism for so long now that it's really hard to remember what my first motivations were. Sometimes I get an inkling that they weren't very admirable motivations, which puts me in good company. I read a lot of autobiographies and biographies of a lot of really famous Buddhist practitioners, both monastic and lay. And sometimes you'll hear them be honest. Sometimes you have ones who are being honest and really were, like from the very moment they saw the statue of the Buddha, they saw the temple, they saw the monks, and they just knew. But then you have other monks like Venerable Master Taishu in China, who when he was a little kid, his grandmother just brought him around to different temples, whether they be Buddhist or Taoist, and he didn't even know the difference. But he read all of these fantastical tales and stories of monastics, both Buddhist and Taoist, with all kinds of superpowers. And so his motivation when he was around 14 was to become one of those monks because he wanted superpowers. He wanted to be able to fly and move through walls and have ability to see the future and all these other stories they had of monastics. You sometimes see them paintings of monastics sitting cross-legged with their palms together, just floating through the air. He wanted to be one of those guys. It took him a while to realize that there were other qualities he might want to develop, regardless of whatever powers may manifest. He wanted to be free, the way many of us eventually, as we keep developing the past, do. We want to be truly free, unbound. But he wanted powers like that. And when I think back to when I was a little kid, when I look at what I watched, it was also really fantastical stories. Even the ones I read were very much like that. I saw the Buddha having fantastical abilities and cool experiences, and I saw stories of monks and kung fu, Shaolin monk types and everything like that. And that probably did it for me too. There was always that part of me, even now, that kind of wants to be a wizard. I look at every gray hair growing in my beard, like going, getting closer every day. One day, Gandalf, here I come. But once we grow up and mature, our motivations should be a bit better than that. We're not after power. We're not after admiration. We just want to be free, truly free from greed, from aversion, from delusion, from stress, from suffering. It's not that the world is entirely bad. There's plenty of good in the world too, but everything has its cost. One of the passages that I really find powerful in the canon is when the Buddha is thinking about leaving and going off to be a monastic, and he looks at the world and he sees the world as constantly being in competition with one another. And he didn't want to be in competition with anyone. He wanted to find a happiness that was truly blameless, truly free, didn't take from anyone in its development and its attainment. And so that's what he set out to do. And so goodwill is a lot of that. It's wanting to find that kind of happiness for yourself. It's wanting others to have that happiness as well, to really want to be peaceful, to be free. When we develop goodwill, we don't want people to be happy just doing what they're already doing. It's not like we look at the guys in Wall Street and go, yeah, that, but also happy. Or we look at someone stealing someone's flat screen out of their home and that, but also happy and peaceful. No. We want them to see the error of their ways. We want them to change. And when we look at what's happening in the world today, that's a good and admirable quality to have right now. To want people to be different, to see the error of their ways, and to do things differently, to have different motivations and different actions in their life. When we talk about all four Brahmaviharas, it's quite common to start paring them down, sort of reducing them. My teacher does this as well. He says that the four Brahmaviharas you really talk about in just two. You can talk about goodwill or loving kindness, and you can talk about equanimity. And while that's certainly a good way to look at it, I think that really we can also just talk about them as just goodwill, as that motivation. Because once we start putting goodwill into action, we start coming across our own thoughts, but we also start coming across other people. And we might find that there are thoughts in our mind that are not based in those good motivations. Essentially, we find those parts of ourselves that are the parts that are not admirable, are not good, the shadowy parts of ourselves. And they're not really doing the things that would lead to true and lasting happiness. And so what is the reaction then? What is the right response to that part of ourselves? The Buddha would say that compassion is that quality. When you look at those parts of yourself, you don't decry that, you don't judge that, you don't cast it as evil, but you try to develop compassion for yourself in that way. See that you're a person who's trying. You're going through life trying to find your way. And then see if you can also extend that to others as well. You know, there's all kinds of people in the streets right now, some of them with good motivation, some of them bad, and they're all doing all kinds of stuff, both good and bad. Some of them think they have good intentions, and they're doing a lot of bad things. And there are a lot of people with bad intentions and do good things, but with poor motivation and so on. People are complicated, but they're all trying in some way or another. And so we can have compassion for those people who are suffering right now, even if they're not aware that they're suffering. They are hurting right now, even if they're not aware that they're hurting. And so we can see how that quality can be something that's worth having in our day-to-day lives as we come across people. Now, to take it back to the Father's Day idea, you know, we get all kinds of lessons that perhaps aren't very useful. I'll give you an example. You know, given what's happening today, it's sometimes hard to talk about my own fathers, both my actual biological father and my stepdad who raised me from the age of 7 onward, because they were both police officers. And they're both retired now. But, you know, police officers, when you're a kid living in El Monte, are not very popular. They're not popular all throughout LA. You know, there's a lot of people saying, like, you know, all cops are bad and things like that. So as a kid, I didn't even want to tell, like, my schoolmates what my parents did, because a lot of them were, like, anti-cop and didn't want to be friends with a kid whose parents were cops. And, you know, like, fair. But, you know, my parents are good people. My stepfather in particular is a cop that hated being a cop the entire time he was one, and tried to work inside the office, inside, you know, the department as much as possible. He hated being a beat cop because he didn't like being the bad guy, you know. His entire time as a cop, I mean, remember, he's retired. He's done a full career. He only ever gave out 3 tickets because he just hated giving tickets. He just didn't feel like it was his job. He was just like, well, all right, I'll give someone a warning and then walk away. That's my actual job. You read the stuff in there that says in the books, I just got to warn them that they're driving recklessly, warn them they're doing whatever. I don't have to make them pay money that they don't have and things like that. So he was like that, and tried to have an office job as much as possible, sat inside, timekeeping, other things like that. But then he also gave me weird lessons. And I remember one time when I was pretty young, I mean, maybe 10 years old, and we were leaving a restaurant, all of us. So it was my stepfather, my mom, myself, and my 2 sisters. We're walking back to the car after having a really big meal. We're all full. We had a bunch of leftovers in, you know, those containers. And as we're walking to the car, it's late at night. A homeless man comes up, approaches my stepdad, and asks for money. And my stepdad says, well, no, I don't have any money on me right now. Spend it all in there. But if you're hungry, we'll give you all this food. And I was like, the leftovers, like, there were some good leftovers in there. Like, there was like steak and other stuff in there, you know, baked potato, whatever. We'd just come back from Black Angus, right, walk into the car. So there's a lot of good food. And, you know, the homeless guy says, yeah, sure, okay. And he takes all 5 containers and starts walking away. And we get in the car, and my stepfather doesn't turn on the car. He doesn't turn on the lights. He simply turns to me in particular, because I was the eldest, and he says, "I want you to watch." I said, "Okay." And we sat in the car in silence and watched the homeless man walk some distance away from us and then just throw all of that food we'd given him right in the trash, right? All of it. And my dad turns around, my stepfather turns around and says, "Well, you see right there? That was not a man that wanted food. He's not hungry. He wanted money," right? And I guess the lesson I was supposed to take from that is that it was bad that this guy wanted money, and it was bad because of whatever he was going to do with that money. And so I don't really know what the lesson was. Should we have not have given him the food? I don't know, right? It was just a strange lesson. Fast forward to several years later, now I'm a young man, about 18, 19 years old, driving around in my first car, which was this really beaten up Jeep Cherokee. And I am driving along the freeway with my girlfriend, and my car just starts losing power. I'm on the freeway and it just slows down. And I'm thinking, oh no, oh no. And I start pulling to the off-ramp. I manage to just get up to the light, and then my car completely dies. It's dead. And I'm looking around and I'm realizing I'm gonna have to push my car while my girlfriend gets in the driver's seat and tries to steer it. And I'm just an 18-year-old kid. I'm trying to push, but it's not really happening, and it's also really hot, so the car is burning my hands every time I try. And like many of us see every single day, there had been a homeless guy right there, right on the off-ramp with his sign. And a lot of people are just passing me right by, some of them even honking, some of them even giving me the finger. My car's broken down, it's not my fault. But everyone's just I'm just in their way. And then this homeless guy comes over, and he's the only one that helps me. So he and I together, he even uses the sign he had made to ask people for money to push the car so he doesn't burn his own fingers. And we managed to push the car together. We get it to a gas station. And I'm so grateful that someone helped me, that this man in particular helped me, that I just fumble in my pocket and just give him the money that I had. And I'm an 18-year-old kid, so I had like $20 in my wallet, maybe 40, but I ended up giving it all to him. And then, I think back on my father's lesson, and so I watch the man as he walks away from me with the $20 to $40 I'd given him. And I watch as he immediately goes across the street into a liquor store. And so, if I had continued with my father's lesson, what was I supposed to do? Not give the man money or judge him for how he uses it? It wouldn't be until years later that, as I was studying psychotherapy and looking into chaplaincy and looking at all these, other programs where, compassion is a big quality that we develop, where we start talking about, the homelessness epidemic, really, and the people out there and how they live and what they do. And, these are people who are really struggling out in the world, and they don't have the appropriate resources or skills to help themselves. And so, you hear in interviews that a lot of them will end up using alcohol to self-medicate, to soothe their aching bones as they sleep on the street and so on. And so it gave me a more nuanced view on those two interactions, that story from when I was a kid and then when I was about 18 or 19. Which is, if you're going to give. If you're going to receive help, receive it, What people do, they do for complex reasons. But what you can have for people in any of those situations is compassion. They're people struggling, they're trying to find their way. Have an open heart, have some friendliness for them, have goodwill, have compassion. Beyond that, we have sympathetic joy. Sympathetic joy or empathetic joy is the joy that we feel when we see people truly being happy, being peaceful, developing skillfully. When you see someone like, say, Fred Rogers, and everyone's like, wow, what a great guy Fred Rogers is. You just go, wow, it's amazing that there's a guy like that. I want to be like that guy. It's not really empathetic joy when you're like, well, maybe we can make up a story about how he was really a monster, or he was a killer, or he was this or that. Or try to give weird sort of accusations towards him, like, Well, it's kind of, don't you think it's strange that a man like that would just want to be around kids all the time, right? And then you hear the motivations for why Fred Rogers was like that. He was someone who said that it was important for parents to remember what it was like to be a kid, because he was someone who was still in touch with that part of himself. You read his biography, you read his stories, and you find out that he was this sensitive little boy who found the world so scary and so big and so mean. And he was also a little husky, overweight as a child. And people used to tease him for his weight, and he'd go running home crying, and his mom would comfort him and things like that. And so what Fred Rogers had realized is that children in particular, but all of us, since we're all still children inside, want to feel loved and want to feel safe. And so he was motivated in his ministry to do that for children on TV, because he had the ability to do that. He was actually quite wealthy even before the TV show. His parents and his grandparents were part of some industrial business over in Pittsburgh. So they had, like, I don't know if it was steel or manufacturing, whatever, but they were doing just fine. Fred Rogers had a pretty cushy childhood. So he wasn't doing it for the money, right? He was doing it because he wanted to help kids, and he really thought that what kids needed was a presence like that. Someone calm, someone reassuring, someone wise that they could trust. And I remember feeling that way as a kid, watching someone like that. And so as I've grown and developed and thought about my own self as a minister, not a Presbyterian one, but a Buddhist one, and what it means to touch the lives of others, I've been really inspired by that. I have a lot of empathetic joy for people, not just like Fred Rogers, but people who aspire to be like him, to want to have those qualities, to be a gentle soul in a world that tries to tell you that being gentle is foolish. All right? So as we think on this Father's Day, I think it's important, where there's a lot of men out there trying to be strong and cold and distant, you know? A lot of men in this room have received a lot of messages like that all their lives. That crying is weakness, that being open is weakness, and things like that. Those are the kind of messages we receive. But when we have really strong empathetic joy in someone who is free to do those things, who is open in that way, we might ourselves then be inspired to be like them, to be open, to be vulnerable. I have to admit that I had a lot of growing to do in that way because of my own upbringing. When you're around a lot of cops, you don't think it's really cool to cry or be vulnerable. It was actually my wife who helped open me up in that way, that taught me it was a good thing to be in touch with my feelings, you know, which, I mean, we're talking, this didn't happen until my 20s, you know. And that was really freeing to have someone who actually wanted me to be vulnerable and honest with myself, in touch with my feelings. And it only made me admire my wife more, and it also made me admire men like that who saw the real strength in being vulnerable. And now we come to equanimity. Equanimity, I think sometimes in our culture we think of equanimity as just a sort of passive quality, just accepting things as they are. And some people think that that's what Buddhism essentially boils down to, that the goal of Buddhism is just accepting things, not trying to change things. And what I really value about my own tradition and my own teachers within the Thai wilderness tradition is the emphasis on equanimity being more like patience, or like having good distance, in the sense that you're aware of what is within your own realm of influence and what is not. And so equanimity a lot of the time really comes down to understanding what you're able to do right now and being okay with what you can do and what you can change right now, and the stuff that's beyond that you can't be changed right now. And that's a good way to look at equanimity when we're thinking about the good work that we do in the world, right? There's a lot of stuff happening right now. A lot of people are suffering. And I know that there are so many of us that wish that we could just end it all with a snap of our finger, just make it all better. But the truth is that we can't. We have finite resources, finite time. We're just one person, even as a collective in this room. We're just only a certain number of people. There's only so much we can do. But real equanimity is realizing there is still stuff that can be done, and then doing those things. And also knowing your own limitations. Sometimes the best thing that you can do truly is to just be working on yourself, working on that sense of goodwill, working on that sense, that quality of compassion, working on empathetic joy, and working on equanimity, knowing when it's appropriate to let go, when conditions aren't right for change, and knowing, okay, I'll just do the best that I can. And these Brahmaviharas that we cultivate are applicable on the small scale and the large scale. When we're meditating, we can also develop these qualities as we think about ourselves, as we think about others, as we're developing good qualities in the mind and noticing the kind of shadowy aspects that are still around. But then in our day-to-day lives, as we're walking around with others, we can still also be developing those qualities. In the same way that the Buddha said that mindfulness is good all the time, we find that these Brahmaviharas, at least one of them at any given time, is applicable. As you're in traffic, as you're at work, as you're sitting around with relatives and in-laws and other people, as you're dealing with both kind and unkind people, people with mixed motivations, there's always goodwill that you're developing for yourself and those you're interacting with. And as you're applying that goodwill, sometimes compassion is what's needed, sometimes empathetic joy is what's needed. And that you will also find plenty of times in your life where you'll need equanimity, recognizing what can be changed and what is beyond your current capabilities or the abilities of anyone. And so I think that as we reflect on this weekend and all the stuff going on, and as we reflect on Father's Day and what it means not only to have a father or to be a father, but to be in the world and have mentors teaching you how to be and how to think, how to do, and so on. We can reflect on the Brahmaviharas as a skillful means of engaging with our own thoughts and the world around us. So I think those are my reflections today for Father's Day. Very similar to my one on Mother's Day, just with more detail. When it comes down to it, we're trying to be good people. Brahmaviharas are skillful motivators in that goodness that we do. So those are my thoughts. Thank you so much.